Hello everyone, my name is Janice Mathis and I'm your host today for Issues. You've got issues, we've got issues, we've all got issues, but today we hope to have some answers for you. Our topic today is advocating for justice, and we've got with us Mr. Garry L. Jones, and Gary's a motivational speaker among other things, but he also has an organization, Advocate for Justice. What is Advocate for Justice, Mr. Jones? Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me on your show. Well, it's an organization that I created after I retired from the Federal Bureau of Prisons. It's an organization, I'm a one-man, I call myself a one-man army, and speaking for trying to be the voice for thousands of inmates that have been adversely affected by the draconian minimum mandatory sentencing laws.
Now, you just said a whole lot in a few seconds. What are mandatory minimums?
Well, mandatory minimums, let me start back in 1970. Mandatory minimums started in 1970 under Rockefeller laws. But what happened, it didn't work. But let me give you the definition of mandatory minimum. It's the judge have to give you whatever crime you commit. Regardless whether or not the judge wants to give you a break, they got to give you at least a mandatory minimum sentence of going to prison. Almost like Martha Stewart, for example.
Okay.
They didn't really want to give her 10 years, but her crime fell up under the mandatory minimum. They had to give her something.
Some confinement.
Yeah, because it's mandatory minimum.
And so you have the judge there, but the judge really doesn't have any discretion.
No, the judge they're handcuffed. They have to go by the sentencing guidelines.
The federal sentencing guidelines.
And they created these guidelines to determine how much time you're going to get for the amount of crime, for about the amount of drugs and different crimes that you commit.
Now, you were an employee, a lieutenant, I believe, with the Federal Bureau of Prisons. How did you find yourself being an advocate for the inmates? You kind of switching uniforms on us, aren't you?
You know what it is? I think it started back when I was a kid.
Okay.
I have always stood up for what was right. And when I was in school, I always stood up for what was right. And every job that I took on, I always stood up for what was right. So without me knowing that I was an advocate for justice, I was an advocate for justice. Then I started working with the prison system, and I seen a lot of things that was going on that wasn't right.
Like, give us a for instance.
Most of all of our people were being incarcerated, and we don't make up the 12% of the population.
But we make up over half the federal prisons.
Half of the federal prison, that's what we make up.
Now, the federal prison system has grown a good bit over the last decade or so, has it not?
Most definitely.
I think I read someplace that there are over 2 million Americans in prison at any one time in the United States.
As a matter of fact, it's 2.1 million inmates incarcerated in the United States, and that's federal and state put together. Combined.
What has led to the growth in the prison? I mean, crime is down, prisons are up. Have we just locked up all the bad people? And
no, in reality, we haven't locked up all the bad people. We're locking up good people that can make a change. We're locking up people that first-time offenders, first-time nonviolent offenders. Those are the people we are locking up. People that can get into the system and rehabilitate themselves. We're locking up people that never been in trouble before in their lives. And we're locking up people that can come out and be better citizens. But we're giving them so much time, 10, 15, 30 years for simple drugs. And
so after they serve their, if I'm understanding you correctly, if you're given 20 years in the federal system, you're going to serve how much of that?
About 19 years and 7 months.
Virtually all of it?
All of it.
Is that what they mean when we hear them talk about truth in sentencing?
Yes. What it was, back in November the 1st, 1987, they abolished the parole in the federal prisons. The year before that, in 1986, they came out with the Anti-Drug Act.
Now, when you say they, who exactly bears the responsibility for doing away with parole in the federal prison system?
Congress.
United States Congress.
United States Congress.
Under the leadership of President Bush the First.
Yes.
1987. That development, the abolition of federal parole, coincide with the growth of the number of prisoners incarcerated?
Oh, yes.
What was the point? What was, just mean, or what were they trying to do?
Well, it is, you got to understand, we live in the United States, and most of the United States is political.
It's political.
Yeah, and what started...
Well, we don't have political prisoners in the United States of America, do we? They only have political prisoners in places like Iran and North Korea.
That's what they tell you.
Oh.
I worked in the system, I know.
Okay.
How about
you've been inside the belly of the beast. What does it look like in there, Jonah?
Well, I have to say,
I'm sorry, being silly. I'm being silly because
no, you're not.
This is a very serious topic. It affects us all. I have family in federal prison. Maybe many of us do. Somebody's telling me it was Reagan and Bush. I know in 1987, if that date is right, we didn't have but one president at a time. And so they passing me notes from the control room. We'll debate the chronology of the American presidency another time.
Right.
But anyway, let's get back to, I don't mean to make light of this story or of this subject. It is a very serious topic that we all should know more about. But I guess I'm being a little sarcastic because we do say in the United States we don't have political prisoners. So when you say that some people are incarcerated because of politics, I need you to explain that to me.
What I mean, it goes into a deeper realm. Back in 1986, do you remember Len Bias, the basketball player?
Suddenly collapsed of a heart attack.
And what happened, the public was putting pressure on Congress to come up with something to stop the drugs from coming into this country. So Congress kind of jumped on the bandwagon. It was like a political issue.
Hard cases make bad law.
Right. And they jumped on this bandwagon. We have to do something about the drugs coming into the country. So they decided they'll go back to the Rockefeller law that was passed in 1970, mandatory minimum. Of course, they abolished it, but in the early 80s, they came back with the mandatory minimum. So it didn't work back then, but they figured in the 80s it would work. And what they was doing, they was taking, how it all started was their purpose of coming up with this mandatory minimum were to get rid of the drug kingpins.
The importers, the guys with the planes and the boats and that sort of thing. Okay.
That's how it all started.
Which seems reasonable enough. If you can stop it at the borders, it never gets into the communities, never gets to the Len Biases of the world.
Correct, but the thing about that is we get the drugs into the country, we distribute the drugs, and we have our people going out, our children buying the drugs. And this topic makes me kind of emotional a little bit.
Why is that?
Because there was, crack cocaine and powder cocaine. They were giving away different sentences.
Two forms of the same drug.
It's the same drug that basically if you take crack, you might get that quick high. Mm-hmm. But if you sniff cocaine, you're going to get the same high about 15 minutes later. So they were giving away, and the time that they was giving away the powder cocaine, was mostly in the white neighborhood.